What if the systems designed to support women were actually wearing them down, burning them out, and breaking their bodies and spirits in ways that we rarely would like to admit? What if boardrooms, classrooms, or even exam rooms that claim to empower women are quietly engineered to extract more than they restore, to demand resilience without offering relief, and to reward silence sometimes instead of honesty? In this Uncorked conversation, we're going to step directly and boldly into that uncomfortable truth. We're going to talk about the emotional, physical, and professional toll women are paying inside systems that were never really built with them in mind. And during the conversation, we are going to name the realities that a polite culture likes to dance around, including the lie of pinkwashing, the commercialization of suffering, and the feel-good marketing that pretends to stand with women while actually standing on them. This conversation will call it what harms. It's going to illuminate what heals. That'll be wonderful. And it will help us imagine what freedom looks like for women who are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Hey, my friends, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and today my guest on the show is Jenni Jackson. Jenni, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim.
We're going to have some fun. Now, people always say, who is Jenni Jackson? Well, first of all, it's Jenni, Jenni Jackson with an I. And Jenni is a mother, a wife, a sister, a friend, and a social worker. And she's a woman who's navigating life, over a decade of challenges and triumphs that are creating the opportunity to reflect and reimagine her passion and her purpose along the way. And that's what we're going to talk about. Of course, every good conversation for me begins with a drink. It doesn't have to be an alcoholic drink, of course, but a drink. Jenni, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm having an Olay over here tonight, Tim. It's a grapefruit mocktail.
Oh, an Olay grapefruit mocktail. By the way, they're pretty good, actually.
They're not bad.
All right, I'm going to balance your mocktail out with, actually, this is kind of interesting. I've drank this one other time on the show. I'll show it to my listeners on YouTube. This is a whiskey from Niagara-on-the-Lake in Ontario, Canada. And it's the only whiskey distillery on the lake. And they make some really great whiskey. And this is a traditional Canadian whiskey. So this is a rye whiskey, one of my favorites. So cheers to you, Jenni.
Cheers to you.
Well, that's a good drink. And I'm sure your mocktail is wonderful as well.
Refreshing.
Excellent. Refreshing is good. Okay, Jenni, let's sort of hit the ground running here. So you and I connected, full disclosure, actually through my daughter-in-law, Emily. For those of you wouldn't know Emily, but Emily does all of the marketing and all the work behind the scenes for our podcast. She's quite amazing. And Emily called me up and said, she doesn't call me Dad. She calls me Tim, because I'm her father-in-law. She said, Tim, you've got to meet Jenni Jackson. Of course, then Jenni reached out to me. I dropped the ball. I never got back to her because I'm a rather cruel human sometimes, so then we couldn't connect. But then we found the right moment to connect, which was good. So Jenni, I got a question for you. You've been on a journey. That journey has had ups and downs. It's had suffering. It's had victory. Tell us a little bit about your story, and then let's figure out how your story connects to the story of other people.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And wow, what an intro. And just listening to you capture some of the essence of the conversation in regards to systems harming women and, you know, the polite way we respond to those things, which is usually just like smile and nod and continue to put up and shut up. But for me, it was kind of later age when I met my partner, my husband now. Wasn't sure which direction my life was going to go. I went the career route and went very hard with my career and giving everything to my career life. When I met my husband, I decided we would have a family. And so a little later age, we had twins. What happened for me was I never made the adjustment from the life I had given my career and the relationship I had with my employer to really recalibrate the type of energy that I needed for motherhood and to be able to show up for my kids and create, healthy kids. So about 6 years into their journey, as the kids turned around 6, I noticed a decline in my health, right? The effort to sustain my career path, my motherhood, all kind of came to a head. In 2023, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. About a year before that, I had reached a point of burnout in my career, kind of recognizing that I just didn't have enough bandwidth for all of those things. And I was originally feeling really like conditioned to that career mindset. But when I had my kids, I realized this is once in your life. You get to have kids, you go through those stages. It's so sacred having children and having a family. I didn't want to miss out. So reached burnout, recognized the need to really reset and figure out what I wanted to do, and then got sick. And I would say the body kept the score. It was actually when I changed careers, when I left an 18-year career and moved, that I got sick, because I think when the nervous system starts to get regulated, that's when sometimes illness will creep in. In this process, I've really explored all of those intersections of, yes, perhaps there was some individual aspects to my particular situation, getting ill, why were my hormones out of whack? But I look at it much more macro, the way in which our culture is sort of creating this type of a perfect storm for women, trying to navigate motherhood, trying to navigate careers. We liberated women in the sense of, having jobs, having careers, making money, but we didn't make adjustments in some of the domestic side of things, right? We're still with some, patterns and trends that really heavily rely on the women to do all of those things. And it's an impossible feat. And so it really came down to, getting sick, recognizing some of the things that contributed to that for me, but also some of the systems that you described in your introduction that I feel that I've, found myself victim to. And I'll say lastly, how do you go forward from there, right? What is the message? What is the process? Because I will also say that it's been my biggest gift to go through all of this struggle and challenge, because you can't have light without dark, right?
Yeah, it's so first of all, thanks for sharing that sort of macro arc of some of your story and your journey, and we'll tuck into those pieces as we go. I'm interested to know, and obviously, again, full disclosure for everybody, I am not a woman, so I don't have the same vantage point that Jenni would have on these things in her life. But I will say that, I recognize as a man in our culture and our society, particularly in North America, let's say, where we are right now, that I would agree with your point that I've often felt that we've got this problem where we've created this sense where, women aren't just invited to do things. There's an expectation almost that you've got to be all of this and all of that and all of that. And if you're not, then somehow you're failing. And I often wonder, I think about my own daughter. I think about, obviously, Emily as my daughter-in-law. And I often think about the pressure that they must feel at times from our society. And so is that part of the problem? Or is it sort of a side to the problem, and there's a bigger one we need to understand?
I think it is fundamentally the problem. We kind of have these conditions, these values, these expectations for people. I have a great husband. He literally will help in any way that I ask him to. But he was socialized in a heteropatriarchal society, which still, sort of breeds those norms and those values around gender roles, right? So I totally agree with you. I feel like a lot of women are set up for that sort of system crunch. Women who choose to go the route of stay-at-home motherhood, I think there can be a lot of shame and like not doing enough, or they're it's this kind of sort of looked at as something less than, and not as value adding. I've come to know and believe that it's more value adding to do the job of raising the kids. Why do we have such a crisis across all of our systems with children's mental health, addictions, all the things? I think fundamentally is because we've pushed and pulled on women's roles too much, and they can't possibly do the child rearing and really give the kids the type of upbringing that they need to be healthy when they're trying to balance all of these other things.
So obviously for you, you're on a journey of finding what that equilibrium needs to look like, what balance looks like, if there is, even if we can find balance. I'm not sure balance is really doable or it should be the goal, but you're trying to find a new equilibrium. So as you have gone through this experience, I get the sense when you talked earlier about your breast cancer that in some ways, of course, you didn't want this, you didn't wish for it, but in some ways it became part of the reset for you. So at what point in the journey, because I can imagine in my mind, obviously I've never had the experience, but you get a diagnosis like this. It's earth-shattering. It could be potentially life-threatening immediately. You don't know the journey you're going on. But somehow along the way, in your journey of being diagnosed and being treated for breast cancer, you start to see that this thing somehow is more than a massive grief. It's potentially a gift. How does that start to emerge? Because I can't imagine that's an easy epiphany.
No. Some of how that emerged was a huge amount of devotion and practice to mindfulness and meditation and being in the present moment and not letting the stories be created by the mind, because the mind is a powerful tool, but man, can mind get to be a monkey on a tree, right? And recognizing, being in the moment and staying present. And so doing a lot of work and being in practice to sort of maintain that for several months. I also had some guidance from some very special people early in my journey that basically gave me, mediumship, channeled spiritual guidance for me and helped me see why this was happening in my life. And also gave me some reassurance that this wasn't going to be, the death sentence that one might fear it is. It was actually going to be a turning point for me. I began to view the illness as blocked energy in my body. And I started to look at why that energy had been blocked in and around my heart, in my breast. I started looking at it from more of an energetic perspective. And that started to really unlock pieces of my sort of inner child and some childhood traumas and things that I had been suppressing in my body and things that were blocking me from giving and receiving love. So I'll tell you, actually, the healing from those experiences, healing my inner child, facing a lot of stuff that I had stuffed down in my body and not processed over the years was much harder than treating the breast cancer. The journey emotionally of unraveling all of the sort of stored emotion, the stuck energy, was a much harder hill to climb than the actual treatment of breast cancer. And I'll say as well, they aren't in our medical system looking at any of those other elements of your whole self, right? It's just strictly the medical model. It's just strictly, the medical intervention. I think that's a huge disconnect, because for me, the true healing and the freedom that I've come into and continue to work at has been through the emotional, the spiritual, and not necessarily the physical. Now, I do, take care of my physical body. It has given me a nudge to do some better caring for my physical body, but much, much more of a nudge to care for my mental and spiritual care. And it's a huge missing element from our current system of treatment for people.
Okay, so you discovered along the way that there was a missing component for you. You began to recognize that there was a larger component to your existence beyond the physical world, your physical body. You start to have these revelations, which is really interesting. I made a comment, I can't remember now when this podcast airs, it'll be 3-4 episodes ago, but I made a comment, and I'm going to bring it back here because I think it's quite fitting. So I have a good friend who is a filmmaker and artist. And he lives in Stratford, and he's a really awesome guy. And I was at his studio a couple of months ago now, and he was showing me, I've seen his film before, but he was showing me some new cuts of this film that he's producing, which goes with a bunch of artwork he's done. It's really phenomenal. And Terry is a very crafty orator, very crafty. And he said to me when I sat in the chair to start doing the preview of this section that he had just recut, he said, "Oh, hold on, let me just turn up the darkness," is what he said. So and Terry's crafty with turn of phrase. Because, and he said to me, I said to him after, Terry, it was in my head the whole time you said turn up the darkness. He said, well, Tim, to see the light, you have to turn up the darkness. And I'll tell you, that thing just stuck with me. And while you're talking now, I'm hearing Terry in my mind again, that sometimes, maybe not for everybody, because I think a lot depends on how you choose to position yourself, but when the darkness gets turned up, our ability for even a little bit of light to break through and break its power, or to give some presence of light inside of it, is also enhanced. Mm-hmm. And so clearly part of your story is when the darkness gets turned up, you start to get some new energy, some light coming on and focusing on a part of your life that maybe you either never had or you ignored. So I'm interested to know your beliefs around this energy and sort of this divine thing that's happening, or however you describe it. Is this an old idea being reinvented in a new way in your life? Is this a brand new idea? Meaning, were you a person of some spirituality and now you're having a reawakening? Are you a person who never really considered spiritual things and now for the first time they're presenting themselves to you?
Great question. I was raised with Christian beliefs and always a value system of treating other people the way you want to be treated and sort of those things. I would say, though, through my journey with religion, I didn't really like the package that religion is for people spiritually. So I am reclaiming a spirituality and a part of my spiritual self and my connection to, a bigger picture and a greater power, with a new ideology of that, right? And I had, through some of this support that I had early in my journey with my diagnosis, I was introduced to the idea of infinite light through spiritual and the universe. And I had never learned about those concepts. I didn't understand, some of the science behind these things either, right? So I'm definitely, new in some of these areas of my spirituality, my learning, what's even possible, the infinite potential. And another big piece for me, though, was everything is about that frequency of love and that vibration of love and gratitude. So even though I didn't know for several months what my prognosis was, how this would look, I felt a lot of peace in my heart with just trusting that each day I had to show up with love and kindness and gratitude for whatever the experience would be. And just really kind of coming back to that, being in the moment, not getting too far ahead of the journey. Because none of us know when we'll leave the earth. We'll all be leaving the earth. So it was just, there was a huge amount of awakening that kind of came through as I learned more about spirituality from a very different perspective than I had been previously given the opportunity to.
Okay, so you had this awakening, there's something happening. You're now looking at this and looking at your body differently. You're looking at the world around you differently, which is, again, a bit of the gift inside of this tremendously difficult situation. I'm interested to know, when you look back, so you talked about how you felt this pressure as a woman in modern society to be all that and all that and all that and some more. Does your sort of journey around saying there's something broken in this and I got to get off this ride, does that happen well before you're diagnosed with cancer, or is it happening while you're going through that? Are these disconnected events, or are they connected?
I think they're connected. I think I recognized the way in which I was engaged in my relationship with my employer. I describe it as very enmeshed, very codependent. The amount I would give and the emotion that I would give my job. And then when I was put in that pressure cooker of parenting, then before kids, it wasn't a problem because the resource was there to give my employer. So I recognized that I was in the impossible, situation of sort of the energy I had to give well before being diagnosed. But what the diagnosis really interlocked and confirmed for me was the impact that would continue to have on my health and well-being if I didn't make readjustments to that pattern and that way of being. Because in that, I obviously wasn't taking good enough care of myself and being able to kind of find that equilibrium. I liked your point earlier. I don't think there's a balance, and I don't think it's a finite, looks the same every day. I think, though, being embodied, being attuned helps us to recognize where our needs are when they change. Like, I couldn't even recognize when I was sick. 5 years ago, like, had strep throat for several days at one point, and didn't even recognize that I had been ill. So I think it was definitely starting to show up in my life before the diagnosis, but definitely the diagnosis created the need to really make some adjustments, to really look at, why was I behaving that way towards my employment? What value is that about for me, that I put all else, that I, give to my employment above all else in my life? What is that about?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I've referenced this before on the podcast, but whenever I have these kind of conversations with people, which are, very sacred conversations, in my opinion, depending, again, if you're listening in, I always say you're listening for a reason, whatever that word sacred means to you, you can define it accordingly. But these are sacred conversations because we're talking about life and death and about what really matters, and I think that makes them sacred, and it makes the space that we have those conversations sacred. I often think of, something that C.S. Lewis said. And, C.S. Lewis was a man acquainted with a lot of suffering in his life. His wife was very sick. It was a very difficult journey for them, and C.S. Lewis was a person of faith, and he said something very interesting. He made the comment that he said God, or we could say the divine, we could say whatever we want there, but God or the divine whispers to us in pleasure but shouts to us in pain. I think he famously called pain the megaphone of God, which is really hard but very fascinating. And you made a comment that the body keeps score, and maybe the body doesn't just keep score, maybe every once in a while the body shouts and get our attention. And maybe we become extremely dull in our hearing because of maybe just who we are, or the pace in which our society works at, or the phonetic world we live in for greater success and more and more and more, and the acquisition of more of that and more stuff and all the things that go with that. Maybe we become really hard of hearing in relationship to a lot of things in our world.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. I feel like that's the design of the system we're living in here, though, is to help, prevent people. And I do think women disproportionately affected in some of these ways when we talk about the harmful designs of our systems, to not be embodied, to not pay attention. Whatever vantage point you examine, whether that's capitalism, whether that's patriarchy, all of them have the same variables, right? Where it's, really teaching people away from their own intuition, divinity, and that relationship with source, and just the simple life, right? And it's, things are nice. I have no problem with people wanting things. I just think that you have to look at the cost benefits for things, right? And recognize that abundance goes well beyond money. There's other sources of things that bring abundance and joy and happiness into our life. And I think there's such capitalism, and that is the money, and people sort of striving for more and more and more. And where does that stop also?
Yeah. The answer is I don't think it does. That's the problem with that. I have a business, and I've consulted and worked with businesses and leaders for the better part of 30 years, and the unfortunate part of all that is people always tend to draw an upward trajectory line of growth. They always expect more on more, and at some point, in my opinion, that just is not sustainable. It's not the way the natural world works. I mean, the world works, the organic matter that works around us, it has seasons of growth and seasons of fallow. It runs and it rests. It has this rhythm to it. There's an ebb and flow in the river. There's when I love to fish and I love to river fish, and sometimes you get these eddies that run backwards in the water, and it gets still, and then it pulls the water back out. I actually think I've come to the belief in my own life that we're a lot more like the earth than we are machines. The industrialization, the industrial age has made us think we're like all machines until I guess Elon makes us all machines, but we're still very much of the earth, and we've forgotten these things. The principle of fallow, of rest, of understanding that living to the edge of who you are constantly has a price, and we're not very sustainable if we don't recharge, if we don't rest, if we don't do lots of things. And these disciplines are really of those ancient pathways that you're talking about. And wouldn't it be interesting if all of us could figure our way how to walk back into some ancient worn paths in the way that we want to think about our lives and about people? Because I think in a lot of ways, the wisdom we need is that ancient wisdom on so many of these things.
Oh, amen. It is. We know what to do, right? But it's holding the tension on the culture and the priorities that have kind of been created for us over the last, 50 plus years with, like you say, industrialization. And again, all of this technology is all fine and well, but not if we've boycotted those that ancient understanding of human nature. Right. And I was just thinking, and what you said resonated with me so much. I had totally lost living my life in cycles and seasons, right? And kind of going with that. And it's especially important for women because of our cycles and the nature of that. But I was always with my foot on the gas constantly, right? It's no wonder that, I just lost the gas eventually. But you're right on. It's wisdom we have. It's knowing we have. What is it that's preventing us from going back to those skills, right?
Absolutely. So, Jenni, I'd like you, if you would be so kind as to speak to maybe two different audiences of women, and then I'm going to ask you to speak to men. So we're going to see. And by the way, just remember, if you're listening in, we don't rehearse conversations. So Jenni's going like, where we're going. Well, I'm not sure where we're going yet. I'm not sure where we're going yet either, Jenni. So we'll figure it out as we go. So I'd be interested for you to speak to a woman who might be in the beginning of a journey with an illness, and what your best and most compassionate advice be to her. That would be the first person I'd like you to speak to, if you could.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so hard and vulnerable when you're in that place of unknown, when you're really at the mercy of your of the health professionals you're working with, because there are, as with any profession, a number of different personalities you might encounter there. But there really are some amazing serving folks out in that field. Work with the professionals, get the tests run, advocate for yourself, get answers to problems. People get dismissed a lot because the medical system is inundated. I don't think it's that the humans working in that system don't care about people. I do think they care deeply, but they're just inundated with trying to keep up with the demands. They don't have the resources required to really address some of the things, right? You see the big signs when you walk in your doctor's, one issue only, no abuse to the physician here, because people are very stressed out in the world. But if you're facing a journey of going down the road of having health issues, your body's keeping the score, there's some nudges there, you need to be persistent. You can be kind, but you advocate, you work with the professionals, you get some answers, you get a treatment plan laid out, you figure some of those pieces out. You need to work on the emotional side of things as well, and you need to have care for your emotional and your spiritual well-being. That's not going to come through the medical system, right? My blessing was I'm a social worker, so I know that work. I know that that's required. I didn't know until I knew that was more the prominent issue for me to look at. Looking at yourself as a whole person, what are some of those areas that you need care for that you're not going to get addressed through our medical system? And really that ability to be present, to just take it all as it comes, to not get too far ahead of yourself with fear, that practice is totally invaluable if you can just come into that place. You know, I run a support group now for survivors, and I've heard from some people that are, stage 4, and that's how they live their life, right? Each day, they're just showing up, they're just taking it as it comes. If it's a day they need rest, they take rest. If it's a day they feel good, they go for it. But the presence, the being able to be in the moment, and that type of a practice is so important.
So really powerful and wise advice, and obviously comes through your own journey, so appreciate that. So now let's turn our attention to another constituency of women. So women who are trying to figure out how to balance all the demands and all the expectations, all the identities that they're supposed to live and be 100%, executive, and 100% mom, and 100% wife, and 100% daughter, and 100% whatever that 100%. After a while, there's not any percent left. So let's think about somebody like that who you can speak to from your experience. What kind, compassionate advice or perspective would you want them to hear?
Mm-hmm. And I just said I'm a social worker, so math isn't my strength, but that doesn't add up, right?
No,
and
it
basically,
does not
that doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. Do we know we're absolutely worthy and divine without any doing, right? Just being human, just being here. You are worthy without any title, without any salary. I encourage people to get really clear about their purpose, their passion, why they want to serve people in the world. I felt very confused about that for many years. Only through some of my experience did I kind of pay attention to those things. Not that I was far off, but some of how I was applying it wasn't a fit. So that inherent worthiness and not having to do is so important. That ability to get clear on your desires and what you feel you want to do here and why you're here on this earth at this time and why you want to serve. I think those are critically important. I think many of us have a story of perfectionism and over-functioning. I do think some of that is the swinging pendulum from the years of oppression of women, and some of, again, that trying to, I think liberation has been great, but I don't think our systems adjusted to liberated women. I'll often say, my mom taught me to be liberated, but my husband wasn't raised to be a liberated man, right? So there were still pieces of that patriarchal model within our family and our system that he doesn't even have the awareness of because we haven't conditioned him to have that. Worthiness. What's coming up for me is a deep knowing you're worthy without any doing, title, CEO.
Yeah. This reminds me, I had a conversation a couple of months ago with a gentleman on my podcast. Guy, his name is Gordon D. Melville, and his thing, he's got this very interesting, very similar framework on life, but he asks this question to people he works with, and he doesn't ask people how they are, he asks them who you be, which is a strange, terribly disastrous grammatical statement, but really interesting. Who you be. And it sort of arrests you because your mind wants to say, well, hold on, didn't you ask me what I do? Didn't you ask me who am I? No, who you be. Mm-hmm. And his whole thing is around identity and understanding who we are. And I really think that that's a really powerful and important idea. And I will say, I'll fess up on this. And I've talked to I have a daughter and a son, and I've talked to my daughter about this. I don't think I parented my daughter very well over the years. Not because I'm a bad person, or not because I didn't intend to be, I tried to be a great father. But again, to your point, I was raised in a certain way with a certain understanding of roles and understanding. I think I'm rather progressive. But I think when it came to my own daughter, I don't think I was rather progressive. And I eventually had an epiphany because I realized, my daughter got married last year, the year before. She was 35 when she got married. She's 36 now. And I realized that for many years in her life, I had taught her that until she finds Prince Charming, she's not complete. And I had to admit that that's really not very healthy. And in fact, when I was honored to give the speech, the father of the bride speech at my daughter's wedding, my speech was entitled, "Don't buy into the bullshit lie that you need a soulmate." Because I realized that the soulmate myth says that you're not complete unless you find somebody else. Now, I think it's great to find a great partner. I think it's great to find a good companion. I think all that's wonderful. But if I need another person to complete me, then I am not, and then I am wholly incomplete on my own. Therefore, that's a problem in the psyche about worthiness and about identity. And I think that I have been part of the problem over the years, not necessarily part of the solution. Not that I signed up to be part of the problem, but I was indoctrinated. I was, sort of weaned into an understanding of what identity roles are, all of these things, gender roles, you talked about that earlier. And so I recognize that this is an insidiously difficult thing to figure out at times.
Yeah.
And, I'm not the kind of person who's going to wear all the blame for everything on my shoulders. There's a lot of things that other people can take blame for, but I have to also understand that I've been complicit at times, frankly, in perpetuating a very patriarchal way of looking at life. And I've come by it naturally, and maybe quite not surprisingly, I've come out of that. But we can do better, and I think we need to do better. So, Jenny, I think it's really helpful advice. And by the way, it's helpful advice if you're a female or a male.
Yeah.
If your identity is so wrapped up in what you do, and when you don't have anything to do anymore, you won't know who you are. And on that day, that's going to be a very difficult revelation. So,
you said something really important, though, Tim, is you were indoctrinated into that.
Yeah.
That's the soup in which you've been marinating in your whole life.
Yep.
It's a powerful ability to be aware.
Yeah.
And also it sounds like you made a recovery in how you've kind of, gave your daughter off and said to her, you are whole as you are. Having a good partner is a great gift in life, but it doesn't need to be something that completes you. Yeah. So you recovered from that. Listen, there's no better tool than having awareness and being conscious of things. We are all colonized here and indoctrinated into these systems. It's the calling them out and saying this is bullshit and we don't need to continue to fall into this. That's where our power lies.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So listen, I'm a recovering male. I'm recovering from too much maleness, and I'm good with that. I'm fine with that. So a good journey. So okay, we've talked to two constituents. So now let's go. Now we're talking about men.
Yeah.
So now, and we've sort of tucked into this a little bit because I sort of went first on this, but so Jenny, as a social worker, as a woman who held a influential role in the business, for as a woman who is trying to figure out what this balance looks like. You and by the way, you have twins. Are they boys or girls?
One of each.
One of each.
Girl.
Okay, you
Yeah.
got one of each. Okay,
Yeah.
So now you're raising another little boy. Now you're raising a little boy and a little girl. So what's your best advice to their future selves? Let's talk about your son. What's your best advice to your future son when he's older?
The journey of being human requires feeling. Okay? We need to help men know that it's safe to feel. We need to know that there's a healthy masculinity and a healthy femininity. And those energies are like yin and yang for each other, right? What we see out in the world is a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of I'm acting tough because inside I don't actually feel safe. If we give men the gift of understanding they are emotional beings just like women, that is part of the human experience. There is safety in that. We don't judge and shame men for feeling things. Oh, man, would the world be a different place if we let men feel what they feel. Just like I had not felt some of the things I went through, men are even more conditioned to internalize. So my advice would be normalizing the feeling part of living, the ups and the downs, also the energy and when it's expressed in a way that's healthy, the masculinity and the femininity are two and of the same, right? And so women can really come into their true femininity when men are in their true masculinity, and when those expressions are healthy.
That's good advice. I appreciate that a lot. So now your daughter, how old are your children?
They are 9.
Okay, so now your daughter's 18 years old, and you're giving her some advice from your journey. What's the one thing you'd want to make sure she heard from you?
It's much along the same line as you are whole and perfect just as you are. Like, you don't need any experience, job, person to reinforce that for you. And actually, just a few weeks ago, I was seeing, can the kids identify things they're proud of themselves for? And what I realized was they are looking for a lot of external validation because I've conditioned them to look for external validation. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have your pat on the back. Like, of course, that feels nice. That's not the problem. The problem is if only being validated externally fills you, then you're going to be walking around with an empty vessel, right? And so for my daughter, especially in the world we have here, is to know intrinsically she is good, she is fulfilled, nothing she needs from the outside is required for that.
Yeah, and by the way, that is sage advice, and it would be great if all of us could give that message to our kids. It doesn't matter how old they are. So again, if you're listening in, obviously you're listening for a reason, and maybe that's a message you need to give somebody around you in your world. Maybe it's your children, maybe they're young, maybe they're adults, maybe it's to yourself, it's to your partner, it's to somebody in your world who needs to hear that message that there's intrinsic worth and value in being a human, which is so challenged these days because so much of our identity is around what we own, who we hang out with, or whatever else that happens in our minds. So really, really powerful advice. So I do have a question for you. And by the way, any question I ask, you can say you don't want to answer, so that's fine. But I do have one last question. It's really about sort of we'll go back to your journey with cancer. So, and I only ask this out of ignorance more than anything. So do you consider yourself someone who has cancer? Do you consider yourself someone who's in remission? Or do you consider yourself someone who's been healed of cancer?
Good question. I think that there's a lot of different interpretations of that, because the clinical terminology now, it used to be like remission was sort of the term that was used when I had heard other people in their survivorship. But now it's no evidence of disease. I consider myself healed. I refuse to live under a cloud of doom with disease. Like, any variable can show up in your life and the trajectory of your world can change in a moment. So I refuse to live in fear. I consider myself healed, never knowing, what the future might hold, but just trying to live in alignment with, that value for love and kindness in all that I do. But my own personal view is that I am healed. There's no evidence of disease. And I feel like, people have to also understand the power in their bodies and minds. The technology we have in our minds is the most advanced technology in the world if we channel it in a way that, really uses it to its full potential. And that is also with the resonance of our hearts, right? Human beings are the most advanced technology here.
Yeah. So I appreciate you entertaining that question, because it's of interest to me, and partly because it connects back to identity for me. So one thing that I find interesting, and it's in my own journey, for a number of years ago, my wife and I were involved very heavily in a sort of outreach community in Oakville where we lived. And we were part of a group of people who started a food bank and drop-in center and some other services in our community in Oakville. Interesting thing, at the time, Oakville was considered one of the most affluent community in Canada. but there was a 2-mile radius. If you drew a 2-mile radius around the certain center in Oakville, you were like 6 times more likely to live below the poverty line. And the reason being is that the Canadian Mental Health years ago had a facility there, and people moved in for housing and for services. So you had a large population of people who struggle with mental health challenges, and that affected their income. A lot of things happened. And the one thing it became very clear to me, and this I think ties back to the issue of identity and disease. So, you see yourself as someone who had cancer. You see yourself somebody who has now been healed of cancer. I would hazard to say that in your journey, never did you say, or did anybody say, you didn't say, I'm a cancer. You might have said, I have cancer. But what we noticed, this insidiously evil thing when we were working with people with mental health, and we saw it in other places. But what would happen is that when people came in and I would introduce myself to them, I'd say, hi, I'm Tim Windsor, who are you? They'd give me their first name, and then they say, hi, I'm Bob. I'm a schizophrenic. And I would say, oh, tell me about yourself, Bob. And what I realized is their illness had become their identity. But I also realized that wasn't just them, that's what we were doing that to them. So somebody who struggles with depression, sometimes people say, well, I'm a manic depressive, not I struggle with depression. Instead of saying I struggle with schizophrenia, I'm a schizophrenic. And so we started to realize, and we thought that there was this really powerfully, insidiously evil thing sort of happening, because now people were taking that into their identity, and ultimately from a brain science perspective, maybe a universe perspective, energy, you're sort of casting this sense of identity over ourselves, or they were, like a cloak. And I began to realize, I think that's problematic. I think this is part of the problem. And I started to look back in history, and if you look at this whole issue of identity, and I'll give an example from history. I mean, it's very clear from historical purposes that when Hitler wanted to dominate and take away the Jewish identity, one of the things he did is they took away people's names and they gave them numbers. This is a re-identification of something, of somebody, and it's insidiously evil. And we do it to ourselves sometimes when we talk to ourselves. We've done it to people in our society by broadcasting their disease as their identity. And I think it's all wrapped up into a really super evil concoction that starts to create an unintended or maybe potentially intended consequence, which is absolutely diabolical.
Wow. And I was even thinking about, the colonization of Indigenous people here in Canada too, right? And thinking about some of those same tactics and strategies.
Correct.
You're bang on, right? And it's two things. It's that system creating those narratives about people being their illness. But then it's also the power of our mind if we're promoting an identity of ourselves that is that, right? And this isn't sort of the same, but I think it's linked, I think people can either choose to be a victim of their circumstance, or they can choose to find their power. It doesn't always mean you can control the outcome, by the way, but I approached cancer with a mentality of finding my own power and accepting and surrendering to what I couldn't control. Yeah. But I did take what I could control and decided how I would. And basically that's my own thinking. That's my own behavior. That's how I show up and treat others. But I was never a victim. Yes, there were moments. And I think it's important too. If you have moments where you feel sorry for yourself, absolutely. Be there with yourself then, right? Have those moments. We don't want to repress those experiences or emotions when they come up, because we do have to feel them to heal them.
Yeah. Oh, that's really wise. And by the way, Jenni, what a really great conversation. And what, again, if you're listening in, we don't script these conversations. I've said this before in this conversation, but what I love most, and I said this to you when we engaged, I put it in the email I sent to you. I always say to my guests, the conversation we're supposed to have will find us, and I believe very much in that. And so really powerful conversation, really honest, appreciate your vulnerability around your journey and the things that you've felt and experienced. You're your really great, wise, compassionate advice and counsel to people. And I think we found some really interesting parts of this conversation. So here's my question. If somebody wanted to track you down, and you mentioned that you run a support group, is there a way that people can connect with you? How could they find you if they wanted to?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I volunteer through Wellspring. So Wellspring is a not-for-profit cancer support center, and there's a satellite location in Stratford. So I do some peer support there. Like if people are on the journey, have a loved one with illness, then that's a channel. But I'm on the socials. Happy to connect if there's something I can offer. I do truly feel like, sharing my story, bringing words out into the world about recovery, about power, is also a service to others, because unfortunately 2 in 8 women will have breast cancer, 1 in 3 men will have prostate cancer, right? So there's more of this happening, and we need to really, I think, develop our emotion intelligence around some of this stuff, and be working through that for folks.
Yep, totally agree. So, listen, if you want to hunt down Jenni, remember it's Jenni Jackson. If you want to find her, Wellsprings, for those of you who are listening in, Canada and the Ontario area, Stratford, you would probably know from the Stratford Festival. If you're listening around the globe, you have no idea what we're talking about. But hey, if you're listening around the globe, find a local. If you need to, get connected to some local people, and I'm sure you'll find some great people who are on a similar journey of discovery about who they are, and not because of what they do, and people who are on a healing journey of finding wholeness, finding as the darkness gets turned up in their world that the light tends to want to shine brighter for us. So Jenni, thank you so much for the conversation. Again, if you listened in, you listened for a reason. Thanks so much for listening. Do me a favor. Send me an email at tim@uncommodified.com, or DM me and let me know how you're uncorking and processing this conversation in your life for the benefit of the people that you connect with. Thanks so much. Have an excellent evening. Jenni, thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you, Tim.